Hello, this is the Green Corn Rebellion show, and today I'm here with JoBeth Hamon, who is the Ward
Six.
6, I believe, yes, city council person in Oklahoma City. How are you doing today?
Pretty good. Try not to die.
That's good. Same here. Where are you from and where'd you grow up at?
So I'm actually originally from the Pacific Northwest. So I grew up in Washington, Oregon. But my parents are actually originally from this part of the country. So my dad's from Bartlesville and my mom is from Houston in Texas. So when I was getting ready to go to college, when my brother was getting ready to go to college, my parents really encouraged him to look out of state and out of the region. And so we both ended up coming to college in this part of the country. Originally from kind of the desert part of the Pacific Northwest. Usually people think they're like, oh, so it's really, really rainy. But actually we lived on the eastern side of all the mountains. And so we were kind of in the high desert, really kind of dry parts of both Washington and Oregon.
All right. And you ended up graduating from OBU here in Shawnee.
Yes, I did.
How did you end up going? Yeah, so how'd you end up going to OBU?
So my freshman year of college, I actually went to Texas Christian University in Fort Worth. But that was actually the year of the previous Great Recession, which feels like we're about to have another one. But in 08, 09, when that financial crash happened, it was my freshman year of college, and my parents were essentially like, so now your college, like savings that we had for you is greatly depleted, and TCU was really expensive. Tuition was expensive, but also just the housing there, like to live on campus and stuff, was really way more expensive than a lot of colleges. So I originally went into college to study film and theater, and thought I wanted to maybe like go into filmmaking of some kind. And as I was taking classes my freshman year, I realized that I was actually way more interested in the stuff that I was doing in like my volunteer life. So I had been helping out at like a food pantry and doing some other stuff just through my church. And so between like not being as interested in film and theater as I thought I would be, and then also like helping out with and like learning about poverty and about all the just I'd never really like been seen so much poverty like so regularly, because where I lived in both Washington and Oregon, it was pretty sheltered and easy to like it just wasn't a lot of like really visible poverty. And so I ended up, partially because of my school funds, but also I was interested in changing my major and wasn't really sure what that would look like. I didn't want to wander around TCU with it being so expensive and all of my college funds being less. So my brother was recruited to play soccer at OBU. And so when I was looking at maybe a different place to go to college, I ended up applying to OBU just partially because it was somewhat familiar, but I played golf in high school, and so I was able to get a golf scholarship. They offered me some academic scholarship, and so it made it a little easier to go, and felt like I could maybe take my time a little bit more, try to figure out maybe what I wanted to major in. So that's kind of how I ended up at OBU. And so I ended up majoring in family and community services. So kind of in that line of like social services, because it seemed like the place that I could learn about all of the horrible injustices of the world in class was kind of what it felt like all of my classes were about. But it was really good.
All right. Can you let's see. I'm trying to see here. Okay. What made you want to run for city council in Oklahoma City?
So I always sort of saw myself as like more of like in the advocate, like community world of like, that I was someone who would like go advocate to elected people. I never really saw myself as someone who would like try to run for anything. But so when I moved to Oklahoma City, and I guess part of that was I also like really only before I moved to Oklahoma City, I paid attention a little bit to city government, but mostly was paying attention to like state and federal stuff. And but when I moved to Oklahoma City, I decided not to buy a car. So I was living without a car, and I would just like, I started taking the bus and riding my bike, and was realizing all this infrastructure that like, I was like, I would get off the bus and there wouldn't be a sidewalk. And I was sort of like, who is in charge of this? Like, who do I talk to about this? And because I see like, because I work in like mental health and homelessness services world, I started realizing so much of how like our city like built infrastructure of like sidewalks and how we use our streets, or what we invest in our communities and our neighborhoods, really tied in with that. All of the work, like advocacy work that I had done, that when I started paying attention to what was happening at the city level, it was sort of shocking to me how disconnected, I guess, it felt like a lot of the city council, or just city leadership in general. The most visible is obviously city council and the mayor. But even I think within a lot of people that work in the city as a whole, we live in our own bubbles. Like, we know what we know and we don't know what we don't know. And so when I would go to city council meetings around different issues, I would just listen to the conversations, and I was like, it was just really staggering how little the conversations when it came to things like poverty, and when it came to things like our built environment, about investing in things like parks or sidewalks or transit, even just there wasn't a lot of like experience that I heard, or education that I heard, that the conversations just weren't as well-rounded, I felt like. And so when I realized that the woman who was my previous representative was retiring, and I started asking around to people, because originally I was like, I need to find someone to run. Like, I was going to find someone who will run for city council and will be my representative, and I'll go like volunteer for them, and I'll donate money to them. And when I started asking around, like, everyone that I knew that I figured would have like their ear to the ground about like who maybe was interested in running, was like, no, I've not heard of anyone. No one like who thinks, in this way, or like you do, is interested in running. I was sort of, it was a little bit like I volunteered myself, because it was kind of like, okay, well, nobody else is anything here. So, and it was interesting because it was also at that time, it was right after the 2016 federal election. And so there was a lot more discussion about younger people running for office, about women running for office. And I actually had an acquaintance of mine who is now a county commissioner in Oklahoma County, was younger. She had worked in public health and and at the time was running for county commissioner. And I was like, oh, like we people who are like in this world can be doing that. And so it was a little bit also a little of like seeing people like me doing that, I think helped me realize like, oh, I don't have to find someone to run. Like, if I want someone who has my values or is talking about the things that I want to talk about, like maybe I can just do that instead of trying to find someone. So yeah, when it kind of dawned on me that no one else was stepping up to do it, I was like, okay, I guess I'll give this a shot, and really did not totally. I mean, I think you can't necessarily say that I had no expectation that I would win, just because like I wouldn't have done it if I thought I had like literally no chance. But I really did like that my opponent was, I think he outraised me like 8-1. he had all the connections, like he had a lot of name recognition. And so it just became more and more like, yeah, I don't think this is gonna happen. like none of the odds of kind of the narrative, I guess, were in my favor. So I was actually pretty shocked when I won, but yeah, it was a little bit of like a surprise, I think, for a lot of people who really were like, who is this person? Because it just even in other local races of like county and state level of like people who are running, there were, I think, a lot more women and like young people winning their elections around that time. I guess we shouldn't be surprised anymore, but it still is a little surprising when people like us can win.
Yeah. Let me go backwards here. I forgot a question. Tell us a little bit about your time in Shawnee.
Oh yeah. It was interesting. So I was very, very Christian when I lived in Shawnee. Part of when I was transferring, a little bit of the like an extra, I guess, like perk of going to OBU was that I was like very evangelical Christian. So I was like, oh, it'll be like church camp all the time. It'll be so great. Um, and it sort of was like that for a while, but I also was a Bible minor, and so I started taking Bible classes, I think my junior year, beyond just like the basic ones that everyone is supposed to take as part of like your common electives or whatever. And so when I started like actually reading like the history of the Bible and like how things are written, I was a little bit like, wait, why was this never taught to me? And like learning about like the historical person of Jesus and like kind of the context around like the time in which he lived and all that. And then I also a little bit fueled from like the church side of things. I started volunteering at a ministry downtown called Good Shepherd. I don't think it's there anymore. I think there's another. It used to be run by not First Baptist, Emmanuel Baptist. It was the old Emmanuel Baptist Church downtown, and then when they moved to their new location on the north side, they still owned the building, and it was run by one of the OBU professors and a group of volunteers. And so every Wednesday and Sunday, there would be like evening, like Bible study, play in the gym time for all the kids in the area. And it was like all of that, like Dunbar, like very like impoverished South Side part of Shawnee kids, and like a lot of the kids that we worked with, like their parents were incarcerated or just like weren't in the picture, like whether being raised by grandparents or by a single parent. Just a lot of like, and so I think a lot of kids came to Good Shepherd because it was an extra meal. Like their parents were just like, yes, go get that, get that meal. So we would usually eat dinner with them, play, have like game time or whatever, but then we'd also do like Bible study stuff. And a lot of the intention of Good Shepherd was to like save kids. But the longer I was there and like the more that I was like taking classes at OBU, the more I was like, yeah, I don't think that's like my main goal here anymore. Is like I just want these kids to like have environments to like be kids, because so much of their lives are trying to like raise siblings or help their parents with stuff, and so it just like it really like changed my whole thinking about like what Christianity should be doing, and like I eventually pretty much stopped attending church and only would go to Good Shepherd to like hang out with kids and stuff, and so that was like a really formative thing for me in Shawnee, because especially as I got farther along at OBU, I was more and more disillusioned with sort of the administration of OBU. Like, I don't know, it's interesting. Like, I feel like OBU is such like a bubble in Shawnee that the only things I really knew outside of it were Good Shepherd, and then I played golf. So I would go like play golf at the country club, and then like put like among all these like beautiful like giant houses, and then I would like go a little farther south and like had, hung out with kids whose parents could, barely put food on the table, and was like, yeah, something's wrong here. Yeah, it was like I just got more and more, I guess, like jaded about kind of like a lot of what OBU was like not stood for, because I know a lot of my professors were amazing, and like I had a lot of professors who were very like encouraging of like critical thinking and thinking in different ways, and not like trying to control what we learned. But I feel like a lot of the feeling of OBU was to like, I think a lot of the culture of both the students and then like the faculty as a whole was like, if you believe things differently, or you're thinking about things differently, then you're kind of like a heretic of some kind. It was like a little bit like that. And so I kind of ended up, by the time I was like leaving OBU, I had very much, there was like a few professors that I like would talk to really often, then a handful of like other students who were kind of like in that same boat with me. And then I had started to make friends like outside of OBU, mostly through SIPs. I don't know if you ever hung out at SIPs, but it was a coffee shop that my now spouse started in downtown Shawnee in 2010. And it was an interesting spot because it really did end up, I think, being like a respite for a lot of like OBU kids who like needed a different kind of community. And so like I got to know people who just like lived in Shawnee and who had like either gone to OBU or who, had no connection to OBU and just like were Shawnee people. And it was really nice to like get outside of that bubble and kind of get to know Shawnee in a different way, because OBU is its own little world, and it's very easy, I think, for a lot of students that go to OBU to kind of get sucked into it and kind of be a little bit divorced from like Shawnee as a community. So I was grateful that I found some ways to kind of get outside of that bubble, because it was I really needed it. I needed my world to expand a little bit beyond that.
All right, that's cool. So when you were sworn in to city council, you swore in on a copy of Howard Zinn's People's History. What made you choose that?
Well, so I don't know. I have an interesting relationship with the People's History, because my dad bought that book for me when I was graduating from high school, and it's this like super thick book with like super tiny text. And I was like, I already learned all this. Like, I don't know why you're giving me this book for like, this is like American history. Cool. I learned that in 8th grade. And so I put it on a shelf, and I didn't pick it up, but every time I moved like dorm rooms and stuff throughout college, I always had it with me. And I think if there were like maybe a few summers where I'd read like a chapter at a time, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. But by that point, it was like what I was reading like were the really early chapters of like Columbus, and I was like, yeah, I already knew he wasn't great. Like, what's new kind of thing. Like, it was kind of in that time where more and more people, I think, were recognizing how horrible of a person Christopher Columbus was. And so I was kind of like, yeah, I don't really know what's so different about this book. But it was actually after I graduated college that I finally read, like that year after I graduated, I was like, I'm actually going to read this now. Like, because I was like, there's like actually a lot about American history that I'm realizing I don't know. So I read it and was immediately just like, everyone needs to read this. And I was just like fascinated that this history book existed that, well, one, my dad gave me, which he is not like progressive or liberal in any way. And so one time I was like, why did you give me that book? Like, this doesn't seem to like jive with much of how, like, I don't know. I think he has like a libertarian streak in him that is just like anti authority, and so maybe there's a little bit of that he appreciates. But he was like, oh, I gave you that so you would know what not to think. And I was like, I don't think that's right, because I think he likes to play that he's really conservative, when I think really he's more in the realm of like, you know, he recognizes that things aren't fair, but yeah, but like, I don't know, I think he has just that a little bit of an anti-authority thing in him. So so it was always a little bit of a mystery to me. But when I was, so I've just really loved Zen ever since I read the book. And even there are a few books that are, there's an Oklahoma historian who loved Howard Zen, and he ended up actually writing a biography of Zen. And then he also wrote two of his own sort of like people's history of Oklahoma books. One is called In Oklahoma I Never Knew, and then I think the second one is called Alternative Oklahoma. And I actually met him the first year I moved back to Oklahoma, after I moved away to Chicago for a few years after college. And then when I moved back to Oklahoma, I like ran into this guy at a book fair and bought one of his books, and started reading his book, his autobiography about Zen, and learned more about Zen's life. And just recognizing that like there's so much more there's so many more stories that exist beyond like the typical narratives that like mainstream culture gives space for. So whether it's through education or just through our own narratives about that we consume through our various media channels. And the thing that I just appreciate about like Zen's perspective on history, and like Davis Joyce, who did the ones about Oklahoma, is that they're telling the same history, like historical touch points, but from a viewpoint of the people who weren't, like I think the way Zen puts it is like from the people who didn't win, and just generally from people of like just the people who didn't get to define the narrative for so long. So when I was thinking about what I wanted to swear in on at for council, I thought about the Bible, and I was like, well, I know that my understanding of like the like historical Jesus and like my beliefs about what Jesus was teaching are very radical and very not like kind of I think what the mainstream Jesus of Oklahoma Christians are. But like that book doesn't mean as much to me as it used to, and I still feel a strange relationship with it. And so I was like, I don't want to do that. I thought about the Constitution, but was also kind of like, yeah, but this was still written by a bunch of white guys who like property, like owning and protecting their property was like the main thing they were interested in. They just didn't want the other old white guys to have authority over them, but they were and so I felt weird about that. And then it kind of just struck me that like so much of my campaign and so much of what I want my time at council to be about is like bringing those different perspectives to the table. And like so much of my campaign was like, there are so many people in our city who have not been represented at council or in city leadership, and we need more people bringing those voices. And so it just like occurred to me like, oh, that's the book, like that's the thing, like is you know the perspective of our city from people who don't have a home, or people who don't own a car, or people who aren't documented, or like those are the perspectives that like in 50 years like a Zen like person is going to write a history about Oklahoma City, and like that's what they're, you know, if they're going to write history from a perspective of Zen, like those are the things that they're going to write about, and that's like what I want my time at council to be about. And so it just kind of made sense to me that like as a reminder of like who I was elected to serve, and what I should like keep as like a like the core of like what I do at council, just felt very, because like to me that's like why people choose the Bible or why people choose the Constitution, is like here's the thing that they want to be faithful to, the thing they want to like, the ideas or the values that they believe this book to hold are the things that they're swearing on. They're saying that this is the thing that's holding me accountable, whether it's like the law or their understanding of God. And I was like, well, really, it's like I want to be the person, like when people look back on Oklahoma history, like that I was the person representing, you know, people who didn't have a voice and didn't have all the power in the room. And so it's definitely gotten me. I have apparently like an honorable mention in a book. There's an anti-Zen, the best name, like or descriptor I can come up. She's like an anti-Zen academic. And she's like, her whole like academic career is about discrediting Zen, and she wrote a book about him, and apparently I have an honorable mention on like the first page. She was like, I guess so her point is like all of these like young people are like rediscovering or discovering Zen and like his radical ideas about America, his anti-American ideals or something. And she's like, there are even people using him to like swear in their, at city councils, or I think there was a district attorney or an attorney general somewhere in the Northeast that quoted him in her like inaugural address or something. And so she brought up that person as well. But yeah, it's gotten me some hilarious Twitter fodder at least, and I guess I'm in a book now, so I guess I'm getting what I wanted.
That's cool. So what all have you accomplished since you've been on city council?
Oh boy. Honestly, it doesn't feel like, I don't know, whenever I think about that kind of question, I'm like, I don't really feel like I've done very much or like accomplished a lot, because a lot of what I feel like I can accomplish is like a lot of harm reduction. Particularly because I think that my kind of thinking isn't in the majority. I often feel like what my role is to like ask questions and help educate people in the public about what's going on. And like I said, kind of like to bring that different perspective into the room. So often I feel like I'm in the losing side of things, but I will say that I think there have been a few times where I've recognized, like, if I wasn't there or if there were a few other people that weren't there with me, that things would be pretty different. And I think one of those big things is our Maps 4 package that the city passed in December, which is like a big infrastructure project that historically, or the way that it's been branded is it's spent on quote unquote quality of life projects, and that typically means like tourism economy kind of projects. So the original one built like the ballpark. A lot of Bricktown is built around Maps projects, like the canal is a Maps project. I think of what some of the other ones are. The downtown library was rebuilt through the original Maps, and then Maps 3, the most recent one that we're still implementing, we built like a downtown streetcar and a whitewater rafting thing. Some of the other stuff. Oh, we did build some senior centers, some health and wellness centers. But a lot of the projects have historically kind of been those kind of big flashy, like, the idea I think of city leadership is typically like, we need to build things that attract people back into the city, or to the city for tourism, for conventions, conferences, that kind of thing. Like the Chesapeake Arena was built with Maps dollars, that sort of thing. So the idea I think has been like, we need to invest this so that we can grow. The way one person put it to me was that we need to like grow the pie. And so the idea, I guess, is that if we build these projects, we generate more sales tax revenue, and then we can finally get around to like improving our bus system and building sidewalks and things. But what I've mostly discovered is that, we still need to pay to like operate all those things, and so either private foundations or organizations, companies have to operate those things, or it's going to come out of the city budget. So with Maps 4, there's a number of, I think there was a general sense from the people of Oklahoma City that they didn't want just big flashy things that they couldn't like open their door and see in their neighborhood. So I think that already, like, there was a tone that this map was going to be different. But then with both myself, with James Cooper, who's the council person for Ward 2, he had a really big emphasis on mental health, affordable housing, transit, walkability, just investing in things that would improve our neighborhoods, parks, those sorts of things. And so I think we were able to really effectively advocate for a lot of increased allocation to a lot of those projects. There still are some like flashy things in the package. So like there's like a big multi-purpose stadium, which is mostly going to be for soccer, but can also be used for like esports, or there's like a lot of other things that they say they'll use it for. We're improving the Chesapeake Arena. We're gonna give money to the Thunder to improve their practice space that we built for them. That's a city-owned facility that nobody in the city can access besides the Thunder, which is like a problem. But so that felt like a loss that we still included that. But and there's still a lot of those things in the package that were frustrating to me. But like I literally pushed up through like the last council meeting where we ended up voting on the package, or to send the package to the voters, really. I made a few motions to try to reallocate some dollars from certain projects that I felt like weren't as necessary into the affordable housing. I didn't win those battles. They voted against me on all of my motions, but we still were able to get, I think it's $50 million for affordable housing, which is a great start. It's definitely, we need way more, but I think if people like myself or Nikki Nice or James Cooper hadn't been in the room, that number could easily just been like 10 and people would have celebrated it. And 10 would be like, I mean, nothing. Like it gets you, a couple 50 units of new housing, and it just isn't very much. I mean, it probably would have been, but it's not a lot. It's not what we need. And then even with stuff like transit, we were able to get a pretty sizable part of the package allocated to improving our transit system and our buses, and then a really good amount of money for a sidewalks, which is like, I think will be really transformative for a lot of my ward, because a lot of the areas that really need sidewalks that don't have them are, it's a lot of, there's a lot of areas of the city that need them, but a lot of like, there are just a lot of people in my ward, that a lot of neighborhoods where people walk because they don't always, they maybe have one car per family, or maybe they just work down the street, so they can just walk to work, or they're using the bus and then walking to wherever their destination is, and they don't have a sidewalk. So there's just a lot of places in Ward 6 that I think will really benefit from getting that sidewalk infrastructure and be a lot safer. And then even like the parks package, it's still not perfect to me. There's still a lot in it that I don't think we needed. But there will be at least one improvement to every neighborhood park in the city. So a lot of parks that just have had no investment for the last almost 40 years will get to have some new infrastructure improvement, whether it's like a new splash pad or maybe a bathroom. There's like a lot of opportunity there to just improve things that really, I think, will help people across like economic spectrums, across like age. A lot of our, I think a lot of the maps is a win for just people, just like a regular person in Oklahoma City, like people who can't pay to access a Thunder game or can't pay to go, play on the river or whatever, but they can, take their kids down for a picnic to the neighborhood park, and now they have somewhere that has shade, or, just this things like that I think will be a big win. Is that really feels like the most, even though there's like still plenty in that package that I like have to complain about. Like I do think about like it could have been so much different, I think, if we hadn't had voices like mine in the room and voices like Nikki and James saying like and it's not even like, I guess, I don't know, making the case for those needs, because like there are so many people who recognize those are needs, but I think a lot of previous council leadership doesn't even realize that they're needs. So it's not even like making the case that they're needs, but just like actually making people aware. Because so many, I think there's a lot of past city leadership that thinks we have enough sidewalks, and it's just because they don't go to the neighborhoods that don't have them, or they don't talk to the people who would rely on them. So it does feel like a pretty big deal to be able to have that much money to really be able to improve a lot of areas of the city that have gone long neglected. So that's probably the biggest thing. There's some other small things where it just feels like, sometimes being able to ask questions about why we do things certain ways through our police or municipal courts in our criminal justice system. Being able to, again, like have a different voice in the room. Again, it's like not always like a win, but it's at least bringing something new to the table or a different idea to try to move the conversation in a new way, and just in general try to bring perspectives to the table that aren't always there.
All right. Tell me about your thoughts on the current coronavirus pandemic, and tell me a little bit about what the response from Oklahoma City has been.
Yeah, it's been kind of a wild ride. I think back, I listened to this marketplace podcast every week called Make Me Smart, and one of the hosts, I think this was like back in December, was like, we really got to keep an eye on this coronavirus thing, because she's a tech reporter, and so the fact that it was in China, like she was really following that because it was interrupting like supply chains and all this stuff for the tech world. And at the time I was kind of like, oh, it's another SARS, or it's another it's one of those like things that breaks out over there, and like it's not really going to affect like the majority of people in the US. And but the more, like, she talked about it like every week almost, like since then. And when things really started like coming to the to the realization that it was going to be a big deal here, so I guess that's only 2 weeks ago. It feels like a year.
I know, right?
I don't know time anymore. Yeah. But yeah, like 2 weeks ago, my full-time job, our offices decided to start getting everyone to work remotely. So I started doing that 2 weeks ago, tomorrow, I guess. And that's when I started asking questions to the city about like, okay, what are we doing? What are we going to have in place for, just like, what are we doing to prepare? Are we going to try to send people to work from home and work remotely? And the so Saturday of that week, or that weekend, I guess, started thinking about, and I know a lot of other states and cities had already they had gotten to the point that they had already been on different levels of distancing and isolation and stuff, because they had just had more cases, because I think they had more people traveling in from Italy and from all these other places, and it was just spreading more quickly. And so that next Tuesday was our a week ago, 2 days ago. I don't know time anymore. Our council meeting was largely not about coronavirus stuff, and I was just like, why are we doing anything but like, there's like, the world is falling apart and we're approving zoning cases, and I know it's like something we have to do right now, but we did they deferred a lot of things that were non-essential, and we sat, we spread, because usually on the horseshoe you have at least 10 people sitting, like, you're like 3 feet from one another, and so they like kind of spread everyone out where staff were sitting in different areas of the room, and but they were in the works at that point of trying to figure out what city staff were like non-essential, that they could get them to work from home. We have some folks that like you just can't, like the call center for the utilities department. The way I understand it, the tech that they have to like make the calls come in through the centralized system, like that's not something that can be set up for someone to work from home. And that's like, especially right now, utilities is like a huge, we really relying on them to like keep the water running. And so like they were trying to figure out, but what staff can we get out of our buildings to be working from home and just create more room and space for the people who do need to be in the office. I was like that Friday and Saturday before that council meeting, I had like sent a few emails to staff asking like, what are we doing? Are we going to stop water shutoffs? Are we, what are we doing? For all of the things that we have authority over. And I was really glad to hear like our utilities department was like, Johnny on the spot, like you're not shutting off people's water right now if they can't pay. They were even reaching out to people whose water had just been shut off due to non-payment to try to get them reconnected. They've been really great in trying to respond and like work with people, and they're really great in general. The water department is very passionate about water being available to people regardless of their ability to pay, and so they work really hard to keep people connected, even if they have to set up payment plans or help people. They can help route people to assistance for utilities, and so it's not the ideal situation because I'd love for us to just like make water free to the public, but the way that Oklahoma law works is that it has to be a fee for service. Like you have to pay for I don't know. It's a state statute thing that is convoluted, but I was glad to see that was something they were like immediately figuring out. A lot of my concern has been like gig workers, people who work in retail, and I think it's just really shown like how much of our economy has been built around like the service industry. Because I have so many friends who work in like restaurants, retail, work as cashier, just in different things where like, okay, well, nobody's coming to the bar anymore, so like all your shifts are cut, and like we don't know when this will end. And so I think it's an opportunity, I think, at the city level, and I'm trying to think about how to talk about that with the other city leadership, because I think we talk about trying to diversify our economy in Oklahoma, and in Oklahoma City in particular, away from oil and gas. But I think a lot of our answer to that has been the attraction economy, the tourism economy. And so when that starts to go, it's just like a domino snowball effect.
Yeah.
Well, if the NBA is canceled, then less people are coming to spend money in restaurants. And if the, shared concerts canceled, nobody's staying in the hotels. And we just have so many workers who we touted this like low unemployment and stuff that I've always just been like, yeah, but like whenever anybody has been like unemployment in Oklahoma City is at 3%, I've just always said, yeah, but what kind of jobs are people working? Like it's still our minimum wage is $7.25. Most of those workers, like it's like, yeah, we might have a lot of like people working, but they're mostly working minimum wage jobs that don't have benefits and don't have any sort of support, like safety net. And so it's to me, I think it's a lesson for us as a city to think about, and I think it there's been like a trending, a wave of people thinking about our what we need to be investing in as a community, both I think on the local level, but also like I think on the national level, that it's not so much about like the idea constantly, I think, no matter what level of government, is like, well, if you invest in the top, like it's that like very like broad trickle down argument. It's like, okay, well, if you invest in like the Chesapeake Arena, then like you generate more wealth for everyone, right? And it's like, well, not really, because like we see how fragile it is, that it's like the moment like we don't have games at Chesapeake, like they'd have no plan for their concession workers. Like that Saturday and Sunday, I was immediately writing the person who who is the manager for operations at Chesapeake, and he was like, yeah, we're looking into it. We're talking to the NBA about it, but they have no plan for all of these concessions workers. But when they come to the city asking for money, they tout how much their employees love working for them. And it's like, yeah, but you literally just cut them off and have no plan to help them in the middle of an emergency. So I think there's a bit of that we're learning as a whole country, but I think particularly for the city, there's a lesson, I think, for us as what the philosophy of how we invest our public dollars, and how, like, well, if we just had, like, maybe we still invest in Chesapeake, but we have a clause in our contract that says that the SMG, which is the company that runs the arena, that they have to allow, like, their workers to be able to unionize, like, because right now there's no provision. Essentially, like, if a union tried to go into the concession workers at Chesapeake to organize them, there's a really there's nothing to protect them from kicking the union out, essentially. But the city could write a contract that says I think the way that the unions have told me the language is like a non-interference clause, where unions can come in, they can provide information, they can do education, and then they just hands off, but the corporation also has to have their hands off. And so I think it'd be a very different picture if we even just had that in our SMG contract at Chesapeake to say, workers can unionize, and so maybe it'd be a really different picture right now. So I think there's opportunities to bring this to really say, like, these things actually strengthen our economy. They're not, detriments to our economy. It's just rethinking, who's benefiting. So I don't know, it's been interesting. For the most part, I feel like Oklahoma City's been a little slow to act. But I think we've been doing the right things. I wish we had done, stay at home much earlier. I wish that we had closed down a lot of different types of business earlier to try to really slow it even more. But I think we've done a pretty okay job. I think if I had the mayor wand, I would have done those things a lot sooner. But I think, as a whole, we've been doing the right things, even if it's been a little behind. But again, my sort of focus has been really trying to, like, continue to ask questions about, like, okay, well, it's great that the city county health department's doing testing, but what about people who don't have insurance? Like, how do they get that medical referral? Like, what about people who don't have transportation? Are we able to provide that for them to get to the testing site? So that's a lot of what sort of I know I've been focusing my efforts on, is, like, just trying to figure out for people who don't have those safety nets, how to get them funneled into getting the resources they need during such a, like, just a really scary time. Like, it's just there's so much uncertainty. And when I look at our I saw something today that was like, a graph of all the unemployment over the last, like, 30 or 40 years, and it's this little, like, it's going up and down. And in 08, 09, during the recession, it, like, had a little bit bigger spike, but then this month has been, like, it's like a straight line, just 5 or 6 times higher than anything we've ever seen. So it is just really, there's so much uncertainty, I think, for a lot of people. And I know a lot of my ward are, like, people who, it's a very moderate to low income. A lot of people don't have internet. A lot of people don't have access to phones. And so even how, trying to figure out ways that they can get their information and the right information for these resources has been sort of top of mind for me throughout this whole process. Because it is just, like, not everyone's, like, thinking about that. And I'm grateful that we do have, in our planning department, we have a homeless services program. I don't know what to call it, but we have some staff that's kind of their job, is to really coordinate and be that kind of clearinghouse for all the partner agencies that are working with people who live outside, and they have just been working around the clock to figure out solutions for sanitation and hygiene. A lot of our homeless services, it's a lot of congregation of a lot of people, and so they've had to completely rethink how they serve people and get people resources, and even just trying to find like quarantine opportunities for people who might be exhibiting symptoms but don't have a place to live. So they've been really like, I'm grateful that we have them, because that was like one of my main concerns, and they're like, we're on it, we're figuring it all out, and like I was like, okay, you just let me know what you need, because like I'm happy to make phone calls or do whatever I need to do, but it's we have people who that's like the only thing they think about, and that's been their main concern throughout all of this. And so I'm grateful we have them, because without that, I think a lot of our service agencies would just be like, they're all really capable on their own, but the coordination aspect of being able to pool resources and ideas and brainstorm and be creative in the whole process has been pretty valuable, given just we underfund those things so much. So they always have to be creative.
All right. Last question I have here is, who are your favorite music artists?
Well, my favorite, so I actually have a tattoo with their lyrics on my arm, are the Decemberists. I don't know if you know them. They're
I would know. I've heard of them, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like they've gotten more popular, but they were like the first band that I discovered on my own as a teenager. And they're kind of like a independent alternative, I think, was like the when I was in high school, was the kind of genre they were put in. But they're definitely my favorite band. And they're from Portland, so it was like it was neat for me, I think, to discover a band that I like their sound and stuff, but that was also like kind of close to home. So they're definitely it's one of those like they can do no wrong. Whenever they put on the album, and maybe it's not great, but I'm critical of it, but probably not as critical as like someone who's not just like gaga over them.
Mm-hmm.
And then I really love Saint Seneca. They're a band from, I think, Ohio. They kind of have like a jangly folk sort of sound to them, folk rock. That's kind of the lane that I tend to stay in a lot. It's like a little folky, but with a little like plugged in. So yeah, I think those are like two that I listen to quite a bit. I also just recently really got into Dolly Parton. So yeah, she's sort of been on my like regular rotation in the last few months. Just yeah, like I listened to that podcast, Dolly Parton's America, and was like, wait, Dolly Parton like has songs about what now? Like, about like, yeah, it was just interesting to learn like all of her kind of that working class background she comes from. Really informed a lot of her music in ways that I just never listened to her, or never had much reason to like cross paths with her music. So that's kind of been on my regular playlist these days.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming on. Where can we find you on social media?
On social media, I am at JoSpaceBear on Twitter. I think it's at JB for OKC on Instagram, and then on Facebook it's just under JoBeth for Ward 6.
All right. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much. It was great joining.